The wind outside roared like a beast, carrying with it sheets of snow that buried everything in sight. I was just settling into my favorite chair, savoring the warmth of the fire, when I heard it. Faint scratches at the door. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was just the wind playing tricks. But then came a sound that froze me in my tracks. A desperate whine. I opened the door to find a trembling German shepherd, his body covered in snow, barely clinging to life. What happened next would haunt me forever. Winter in the mountains is a force to be reckoned with. The snowstorm that night wasn't just any storm. It was one of those relentless, unforgiving tempests that made you grateful to be indoors. My cabin, tucked away in the woods, was my sanctuary, and I had spent the evening doing what I always did on nights like this, stoking the fire and letting its warmth erase the chill from my bones. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and causing the shutters to creak. I was halfway through a book, the kind that you read slowly just to savor, when I heard it, a soft, repetitive scratching sound. At first I dismissed it. Out here, noises were common. Branches swayed in the wind, animals roamed through the snow, and sometimes the cabin itself seemed to groan under the weight of the storm. But then the sound came again, more insistent this time. Scratch, scratch, whine. I set my book down, my heart thudding. Living alone in the wilderness, you learn to trust your instincts. And something about that sound wasn't right. I approached the door cautiously, my bare feet cold against the wooden floor. The scratching stopped as I got closer, replaced by a low, pitiful whimper. My pulse quickened. What could it be? A wounded animal. I grabbed the flashlight from the counter and opened the door a crack. The icy wind hit me instantly, carrying a flurry of snow into the cabin. Shining the beam onto the porch, my breath caught in my throat. A German shepherd stood there, his fur coated in frost, his body trembling violently. His ribs were visible under his matted fur, and his eyes, oh, his eyes, were filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. Jesus Christ, I whispered, pulling the door open wider. The dog tried to step forward but stumbled, his legs buckling beneath him. Without thinking, I dropped the flashlight and reached out, scooping him into my arms. His body was ice cold, his fur damp and rough against my skin. "Hang on, buddy," I murmured, carrying him inside and kicking the door shut behind me. I laid him gently on the rug near the fireplace, my hands shaking as I grabbed a blanket to wrap around him. He didn't move, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. For a moment, I thought I was too late. "Come on, stay with me," I urged, my voice breaking. I rushed to the kitchen, filling a bowl with lukewarm water and grabbing an old towel. Kneeling beside him, I began to gently rub his fur, trying to melt the ice and bring warmth back to his frozen body. His ears twitched slightly, a small sign of life that filled me with hope. As I worked, questions swirled in my mind. Where had he come from? How long had he been out there in the storm? And why had he chosen my cabin, of all places? The storm outside raged on, but inside, the fire crackled and the room grew warmer. Slowly, the dog's trembling lessened. His eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, meeting mine before closing again. "You're safe now," I whispered, not sure if he could hear me. But as I sat there watching over him, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary encounter. This dog had come to me for a reason, and whatever that reason was, it was only the beginning. The fire crackled softly as I sat beside the German shepherd, watching his chest rise and fall in shallow but steady breaths. The room was quiet except for the storm raging outside, the wind howling like a restless spirit. I wrapped another blanket around him, trying to push away the nagging fear that he wouldn't make it through the night. Every few minutes, I reached out to check if his body was warming up. Slowly, his fur began to lose its icy stiffness, and the trembling subsided. I kept rubbing his paws gently, trying to restore circulation. His ears twitched faintly, and his tail gave the slightest of movements. These small signs of life felt like monumental victories. "Where did you come from, buddy?" I asked softly, more to myself than to him. His matted coat and emaciated frame suggested he had been on his own for a long time. Yet, he had made it to my doorstep, through a storm that could have easily claimed his life. It wasn't luck, it was sheer determination. The storm outside showed no sign of letting up. The snow piled against the windows, and the wind continued to batter the cabin. I had nowhere to go, no one to call. Living off the grid had its perks: peace, solitude, but it also meant I was on my own in situations like this. I moved to the kitchen and heated up some chicken broth, the simplest thing I could think of that might coax him into eating. When I returned, his eyes had opened slightly. They were a deep, soulful brown, and they locked onto mine as I knelt beside him. "Hey," I said softly, placing the bowl of broth near his nose. "I made this for you. Can you try a little?" He sniffed the bowl weakly, his nose twitching. After a moment, he stretched his neck forward and lapped at the liquid. My chest tightened with relief. "Good boy," I whispered, stroking his head gently. The simple act of eating seemed to give him a little strength. He tried to shift his position, pushing himself up slightly before collapsing back onto the blanket. "Easy," I said, helping him settle back down. "You've been through a lot. Take it slow." As the hours passed, he seemed to grow more stable. His breathing deepened, and his eyes stayed open longer, following me as I moved around the room. I could tell he was still wary, unsure of where he was or whether he was truly safe. I began to wonder about his story. Had he been abandoned? Lost? The scars on his body told a tale of hardship, but there was no collar, no tag, nothing to connect him to a previous life. By the time the storm began to ease, the first hints of dawn were creeping through the curtains. The dog was asleep again, his head resting on the folded blanket I had given him. He looked peaceful now, his body relaxed in a way that suggested he hadn't felt safe in a long time. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat in the armchair, staring at the sleeping dog. Something about him felt significant, like he had entered my life for a reason I couldn't yet understand. As the morning light grew stronger, I decided I couldn't just let this dog go back into the wild. He needed care, a home, someone to help him heal. And deep down, I knew I needed him just as much as he needed me. But then, as I sipped my coffee, a soft scratching sound broke the silence. My eyes darted to the door. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, but then it came again. Scratch, scratch. I froze, my mind racing. Was someone out there? Or something? The dog stirred slightly, his ears perking up at the sound. Taking a deep breath, I walked to the door and opened it cautiously. What I saw made my stomach drop. The cold wind hit me like a slap as I cracked the door open. My heart was pounding, half expecting another animal, or worse, something unexplainable. But when my eyes adjusted to the dim morning light, I saw nothing at first. Just the fresh blanket of snow stretching across the yard and the dark outline of the forest in the distance. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. The scratching came again, this time from below. I pointed my gaze downward and froze. Another German shepherd was standing just outside the door, this one smaller and younger, its fur just as matted and frosted as the one already inside. "Oh my God," I muttered, crouching down. The young dog took a step forward, its paws trembling from the cold. It didn't bark, growl, or shy away. Instead, it gave me the same look of desperation I had seen the night before, a silent plea for help. "Where did you come from?" I whispered. My first instinct was to bring it inside, but something felt off. Two dogs, both in dire condition, showing up at my doorstep in the middle of a brutal snowstorm. It couldn't be a coincidence. My eyes flicked toward the forest, scanning the tree line for any signs of movement. Was someone out there? Had these dogs been abandoned nearby? The younger dog whimpered softly, pulling me out of my thoughts. "All right, come on," I said, opening the door wider. "Let's get you warm." The cold hit the cabin like an unwelcome guest as I ushered the dog inside. The older shepherd, still lying by the fire, perked up slightly, his ears twitching as he sniffed the air. When the younger dog approached him hesitantly, there was a moment of recognition. The older dog lifted his head, and his tail gave a weak wag. "You know each other," I said aloud, the realization dawning on me. The younger dog curled up beside the older one, resting its head on his side as if seeking comfort. The scene tugged at my heartstrings in a way I couldn't describe. These weren't just two stray dogs. They were family. I grabbed another blanket and draped it over the pair, then sat down beside them, my mind racing. Where had they come from? Were they running from something? The scars on the older dog's body suggested a life of hardship, but the younger one bore no visible injuries. It was smaller, thinner, and clearly weaker, but its eyes still had a spark of life. I fed the younger dog the remaining broth, watching as it lapped it up eagerly. The older shepherd nuzzled the pup gently, a gesture that spoke volumes. They had been through something together, something that had brought them to my doorstep. As the sun rose higher, the snowstorm finally began to ease. I could see the forest more clearly now, the trees standing tall and silent like sentinels. The weight of the situation hit me all at once. These dogs hadn't just stumbled upon my cabin by chance. They had come here for a reason. The question was, what had driven them here? I decided to investigate. After making sure the dogs were warm and settled, I grabbed my coat and boots. The wind had died down, but the air was still bitterly cold as I stepped outside. The snow crunched beneath my feet as I walked around the cabin, searching for tracks. It didn't take long to find them. 2 sets of paw prints led from the forest to my porch, partially covered by the fresh snow. But what made my stomach twist was the 3rd set, larger, deeper, and unmistakably human. I stared at the tracks, my mind racing. Someone had been out here with these dogs, and they had left them behind. But why? As I followed the tracks toward the forest, a sense of unease settled over me. Whatever had brought these dogs to my door wasn't over yet. The sight of the human footprints sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the cold. The snowstorm had passed, leaving the forest blanketed in an eerie, pristine silence. The paw prints and footprints were partially covered by fresh snow, but they were clear enough to follow. I tightened my coat and adjusted my scarf, my breath fogging in the freezing air as I took my first step toward the woods. I glanced back at the cabin. The 2 German shepherds were lying by the fire, the younger one curled protectively against the older. A part of me wanted to stay with them, to let the mystery go and focus on helping them heal. But the tracks leading into the forest gnawed at me. Someone had been out there with these dogs, and I needed to know why they had been abandoned, or worse, if they were in danger. The forest was dense, the snow crunching loudly under my boots as I pushed deeper into the trees. Every sound felt magnified in the stillness, the creak of branches overhead, the occasional rustle of snow falling from a high bough. My nerves were on edge, but I kept going, following the trail. The human footprints were erratic, weaving in and out of the dog's tracks as if whoever it was had been wandering aimlessly. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The prints didn't lead to a clear destination. They zigzagged, looped back, and sometimes stopped altogether before continuing. After about 20 minutes, I reached a small clearing. The tracks stopped abruptly, the snow disturbed as if there had been a struggle. My heart raced as I scanned the area, taking in every detail. There were scuff marks in the snow, paw prints circling tightly around a deep depression where the human footprints ended. What happened here? I muttered aloud. I crouched down, running my gloved hand over the disturbed snow. It was packed tightly, as if someone had fallen or been forced down. A shiver ran through me. The scene was unsettling, like the aftermath of a fight, but there was no blood, no signs of injury. As I stood, I noticed something half buried in the snow a few feet away. I reached for it, brushing off the icy covering, and froze. It was a leash, frayed at the edges, as if it had been chewed through. My mind raced with questions. Had the dogs been tied up here? Had they broken free? I looked around again, my eyes scanning the tree line. The forest seemed to close in on me, its silence oppressive. Whoever had been here was long gone, but the leash told me one thing for certain. The dogs hadn't come to my cabin by accident. The sudden snap of a branch behind me made me spin around, my heart leaping into my throat. For a moment, I saw nothing but the endless stretch of trees. Then, from the shadows, I caught a glimpse of movement. "Hello?" I called, my voice steadied despite the fear clawing at my chest. The figure that emerged from the trees wasn't human. It was the older German shepherd, his golden brown fur a stark contrast against the snow. His tail wagged slightly as he approached, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "You followed me," I said, relief washing over me. He stopped a few feet away, his ears twitching as if listening for something. Then he barked, a sharp, urgent sound that echoed through the clearing. "What is it, boy?" I asked, taking a step toward him. He barked again, turning his head toward the deeper part of the forest. It was as if he was trying to tell me something, urging me to follow. My hesitation lasted only a moment before I fell in step behind him, my fear replaced by a growing sense of purpose. Whatever had brought these dogs into my life wasn't over, and as I followed the shepherd into the woods, I knew I was about to uncover a truth I wasn't prepared for. The German shepherd moved with purpose, his paws crunching the snow as he led me deeper into the woods. Every few steps, he would glance back at me, his eyes filled with a sense of urgency that made my stomach churn. Whatever he was leading me toward, it was important, and likely not something I was ready to face. The forest grew denser, the trees forming a canopy that blocked out what little sunlight had broken through the clouds. The air felt colder here, heavier, and the silence was oppressive. My breath came out in visible puffs as I struggled to keep up with the dog, who seemed tireless despite the ordeal he'd endured. "Where are you taking me, boy?" I muttered under my breath, my voice barely louder than a whisper. He didn't respond, of course, but his pace quickened. We weaved through the trees, following no visible path, until we came to a small clearing. In the center of it stood a dilapidated shed, its roof sagging under the weight of the snow. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine. The shepherd stopped a few feet away from the shed and barked, his tail wagging slightly. He looked at me expectantly, as if urging me to go closer. I hesitated, my mind racing with possibilities. Why had he brought me here? Was someone inside? Had this been where the dogs were kept before they escaped? Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward, the snow crunching loudly under my boots. The closer I got to the shed, the stronger the feeling of unease became. The wood was weathered and rotting, the windows covered with grime. I placed my hand on the door handle, the cold metal biting into my skin, and pushed it open. The door creaked loudly, the sound echoing in the stillness of the forest. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the smell of damp wood and something else. Something metallic. My eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the cracks in the walls, and what I saw made my heart stop. There were cages, 4 of them, lined up against the far wall. They were empty now, but the remnants of what had been there were unmistakable. Matted fur, chewed up blankets, and broken bowls scattered across the floor. This wasn't just a shed, it had been a prison. I turned to the shepherd, who was standing just inside the doorway, his tail low and his ears flat against his head. He let out a low whine, and my chest tightened. This was where he and the younger dog had come from. I moved closer to the cages, my hands trembling as I inspected them. The metal bars were bent in places, the locks rusted and broken. It was clear the dogs had escaped, but not without a struggle. My mind filled with images of what they must have endured here. Cold nights, no food, and the fear of whoever had put them in this place. Who had done this? And why? As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A small notebook lying on a makeshift table near the wall. I picked it up, the leather cover cracked and stiff with age. Flipping it open, I scanned the pages, my stomach twisting with every line I read. It was a logbook, dates, descriptions, and details about the dogs that had been kept here. Most of the entries were brief, but one stood out, a description of the older shepherd. Subject number 12, male German shepherd, strong, obedient, potential for resale high. Resale. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. These dogs weren't just abandoned. They had been part of something far worse. I closed the notebook, my hands shaking with anger. Whoever had done this hadn't just hurt these animals. They had exploited them, treated them as property instead of living beings. The shepherd let out another bark, snapping me out of my thoughts. He was standing by the doorway, his body tense, his eyes fixed on something outside. "What is it?" I asked, my voice shaky. I followed his gaze and froze. In the distance, through the trees, I saw movement. A figure, dark and shadowy, watching us. The figure in the distance froze me in place. My pulse quickened, and I felt a surge of adrenaline. Whoever it was, they weren't just passing by. They were watching us. The German shepherd stood by the door, his body rigid, his tail low, and his gaze fixed on the shadowy figure. He barked, a sharp, warning sound that echoed through the woods. I took a shaky step forward, shielding my eyes from the glare of the snow as I tried to make out more details. The figure began to move, slow, deliberate steps toward us. My breath caught in my throat. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking slightly. No response. The crunch of boots on snow grew louder as the person came closer, their face still hidden beneath the shadow of a hood. My grip on the logbook in my hand tightened as I braced myself for whatever was about to happen. Then, the shepherd did something that surprised me. He stepped in front of me, positioning himself like a shield, his body tense and ready. His loyalty in that moment was palpable, and it gave me the courage to stand my ground. As the figure stepped into the clearing, the hood was pulled back, revealing a man in his late 40s, his face weathered and hard. His eyes darted between me and the dog, narrowing when they landed on the notebook in my hand. "That doesn't belong to you," he said, his voice low and threatening. I glanced down at the notebook, my anger flaring. "These dogs don't belong to you either," I shot back. The man smirked, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "You don't know what you're talking about. Leave that here, and no one gets hurt." The shepherd growled low in his throat, stepping closer to the man. His presence was like a warning, a silent promise that he wouldn't let anyone harm me. "What did you do to them?" I demanded, holding up the notebook. "Why were they in those cages? Why are there scars on his body?" The man's smirk faltered. "You're meddling in things you don't understand. Those dogs were property, nothing more." "Property?" The word came out like venom. "They're living beings. They have more loyalty and heart than you'll ever have." The man took a step closer, but before he could say anything, the shepherd lunged forward, barking ferociously. The man stumbled back, clearly not expecting the dog's ferocity. "That's enough," he yelled, but his voice cracked with fear. I used the moment to my advantage. "You're going to pay for what you've done," I said, my voice firm. "I'll make sure of it." The man's eyes darted to the forest, as if calculating his escape. Without another word, he turned and bolted, disappearing into the trees. The shepherd chased after him a few steps before stopping, his ears perked and his tail still stiff. I dropped to my knees, wrapping my arms around the dog's neck. "Good boy," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You're incredible." He licked my face, his tail wagging for the first time since I'd found him. I knew the man would likely return, but for now, I had what I needed: the notebook, the evidence of his crimes, and I had the German shepherd by my side, a loyal companion who had been through hell and back, but still had the courage to protect someone he barely knew. Back at the cabin, I called the authorities, relaying everything I'd found. It wasn't long before officers arrived, taking my statement and the notebook. They promised to investigate, but even as they left, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The shepherd and the younger dog stayed with me, their bond growing stronger each day. I named the older one Hero because that's exactly what he was, a hero who had survived against all odds and stood by me when it mattered most. As for the man in the woods, I never saw him again, but the scars he left on those dogs and the determination they showed to survive would stay with me forever. Hero taught me something I'd never forget. Loyalty and love don't need words. Sometimes they're shown in actions, in the way a dog stands by you, protects you, and reminds you of the goodness that can still be found in the darkest moments. Hero's story is a reminder of the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. His courage and loyalty changed my life forever, and I'm sure there are countless other stories like his waiting to be told. Dogs like Hero deserve love, care, and a chance at a better life, just like he found with me. If you believe in the power of loyalty and second chances, share this story with your friends and family. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more heartwarming and inspiring tales. Let's work together to spread awareness and give every animal the love and protection they deserve. For 6 long years, he waited behind the same metal bars, while everyone else got adopted. People walked past him. Volunteers cried for him. But no one took him home. Until one day, someone did something no one expected, and What happened next will break your heart in the best way. His name was Shadow. He had arrived at the shelter as a young German shepherd, strong, alert, and full of life. That was 2,038 days ago. Now he was 8 years old and still waiting. Every morning, the staff opened the rows of kennels to clean and feed, and every morning, Shadow stood up, walked to the front, and sat down. Tall, ears perked, waiting for someone to stop, someone to look past the gray around his eyes, someone to see the dog he still was underneath the time in the bars. But no one ever did. The volunteers adored him. He was gentle. He never barked when people passed by. He let children pet him through the bars without flinching. He was patient when other dogs barked and growled around him. He never pushed forward or begged, but week after week, year after year, he was passed over, too big, too old, too serious. The label stuck, and so did he. One of the newer volunteers, a 27-year-old woman named Emily, had been coming to the shelter for about 2 months when she first noticed him. He didn't do what the other dogs did, jumping, pacing, barking. He just sat, straight-backed, eyes calm, watching. There was something haunting in it. Not because he seemed broken, but because he seemed like he had given up hoping anyone would choose him. One afternoon, Emily asked the shelter coordinator, Maggie, "Why is he still here?" Maggie sighed. "Shadow's our old soul. Came in after his owner died in a fire. Had no chip, no relatives. He's healthy, he's sweet. But what? No one wants the dog that's been waiting the longest. People think there's something wrong with him." Emily looked back toward the kennel. Shadow was sitting again, quiet, still, dignified, and alone. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She kept picturing those eyes. Not desperate, just tired. She pulled out her phone and posted on social media. "This is Shadow. He's been in a shelter for 6 years. Never had a single adoption. Never even a trial. Please share his story." She hit post and went to bed, not expecting much. By morning, the post had been shared over 2,000 times. By noon, 20,000. And by nightfall, national news outlets were asking to cover the story. But what no one expected was who saw that post next, and what they said when they called the shelter. It wasn't just emotional, it changed everything about Shadow's story. The next morning, the shelter was buzzing. Phones rang. Emails flooded in. Volunteers whispered as they passed Shadow's kennel. Some with smiles, some with tears they tried to hide. The post had gone viral. More than 50,000 shares in under 24 hours. Offers came in from as far as Washington, Oregon, even Canada. But it wasn't the volume that surprised everyone. It was one message in particular. Emily stood in the office with Maggie, holding her phone in both hands. She read the message out loud, her voice trembling just slightly. "I think that's the dog I lost. His name was Max. I've been looking for him for years. Please, tell me it's really him." Daniel Rivers. Maggie narrowed her eyes. "You think it's legit?" Emily turned the phone toward her. "He attached pictures. Look." They scrolled through images taken 8 years earlier, before the fire. A younger version of Shadow running through snow, lying on a living room rug, sitting beside a man with a beard and soft eyes. Same ears. Same white patch under the chin. Same steady gaze. "It's him," Maggie whispered. Emily swallowed. "What do we do?" "We get him here, fast." 2 days later, the shelter parking lot was quiet, until a silver SUV pulled in. The man who stepped out looked weathered, maybe late 30s, jeans and flannel shirt, eyes glassy before he even reached the door. Daniel had been searching for his dog, Max, since the fire that destroyed his cabin. He'd been hospitalized for months. When he finally got out, no one knew where Max had gone. The shelter that had taken him in had long since shut down, and records were never transferred. He had assumed Max, Shadow, was gone, but then he saw the photo in Emily's post, and everything inside him collapsed. He knew. Maggie led Daniel through the back hallway toward Shadow's kennel. The old shepherd was lying on a padded blanket, resting his head over his front paws, when he heard the footsteps. He lifted his head, then froze. For a moment, no one moved. Emily watched from the side, barely breathing. Daniel stepped closer, slowly, and knelt just outside the bars. "Max," he whispered. The dog blinked, tilted his head. The name stirred something in his body, as if it had been buried under years of silence. Then, without barking, without hesitation, he stood up, walked to the gate, and sat down, just like always. Except this time he wasn't looking through a stranger. He was looking into the eyes of the man he'd never stopped waiting for. Daniel reached through the bars, hand trembling, and touched the side of Max's face. The dog didn't flinch. He leaned in, gently, slowly. And then, a sound escaped Max's throat, a soft, shaky whimper. His tail thumped the floor, once, twice, then faster. Maggie turned away, wiping her eyes. Emily stood frozen, hands over her mouth. Daniel's voice cracked. "I thought you were gone." Max nudged his nose into Daniel's chest, breathing him in, recognizing what 6 years hadn't erased. Home. That afternoon, the adoption papers were signed. No questions, no waiting period. Not this time. Everyone in the shelter lined up to say goodbye. Staff, volunteers, even other adopters who had followed the story online and showed up just to see him leave. Shadow, now Max again, walked proudly beside Daniel toward the front door, tail wagging, steps sure. As they reached the exit, Max paused, turned around, and looked back down the hallway he'd walked for 6 years, then turned forward and walked out. Into the sunlight, into freedom, into everything he thought he'd lost. But what neither of them knew was that Max's story wasn't over. Because once he was finally home, he would do something that would leave Daniel, Emily, and everyone who followed his story absolutely speechless. The first few days back home were quiet. Daniel lived in a small, cozy rental house just outside of Boulder, Colorado. Nothing fancy, just a fireplace, a couch, and a few framed photos from a life that had once been full and then torn apart. Now it was full again, with paws padding across wood floors, with water lapping in a bowl, with the sound of a sigh before sleep. Max had claimed the living room rug within minutes, as if it had always been his. Daniel couldn't stop watching him, not obsessively, just in awe. The way Max moved, the way he scanned the room before settling in, the way he followed Daniel with quiet steps, like he was still making sure it wasn't all a dream. Sometimes at night, Daniel would wake up and find Max curled at the side of his bed, eyes open, breathing slow, as if he was guarding something, or someone. One morning, after a walk along the creek, Daniel decided to visit the old cabin site for the first time since the fire. Max sat in the back seat of the SUV, calm but alert. The closer they got, the more Daniel noticed the shift. The ears perked higher, the eyes narrowed. The memories were heavy. When they arrived, the ruins were barely visible, just blackened boards and moss covering the past. The land was quiet now, peaceful. Daniel stepped out. So did Max. But he didn't walk forward. He stopped and stared toward the edge of the forest. Daniel followed his gaze. Max, he said softly. The dog didn't move. He was locked on something, then he took off. Not in panic, in purpose. Daniel called after him, heart racing. He followed Max down the slope, through bramble and brush, until they reached a narrow clearing by the creek. Max stood still, ears twitching. And then Daniel heard it too. Crying. He pushed through the last of the brush and froze. There, curled near the base of a fallen tree, was a child. No older than 4, shoes muddy, jacket torn, face red from cold and fear. Max approached slowly, crouching low, tail wagging gently. The child whimpered, then reached out, and Max let her touch him. Daniel moved in fast, pulling off his jacket. "Hey, sweetheart," he said gently. "It's okay, you're okay now." She didn't speak, just clung to Max's fur. A search party had been out since sunrise, Daniel would learn later. A little girl named Abby who'd wandered from her grandparents' house during a hike the night before. No one had found her, until Max did. The sheriff said it best. "We would have lost her by nightfall. Your dog saved her." News of the rescue spread faster than the original adoption story. Max, the shelter dog who waited 6 years, had become a hero. Not trained for search and rescue, not bred for it, but led by something else. A memory, a bond, a sense that he had been given a second chance. And now, he had to give one back. That night, Daniel sat by the fire, Max curled at his side. The wind moved outside like a whisper. He looked down and said quietly, "You weren't waiting for a family, were you?" Max looked up. "You were waiting for a moment." Max didn't wag his tail. He didn't bark. He just laid his head on Daniel's lap and closed his eyes. Because some souls don't just survive what they've lost. They rise and carry others out of the dark with them. But there's still more to come. Because Emily hadn't forgotten Max, and what she was about to offer him would open a whole new chapter in his life. 3 weeks after Max rescued little Abby, the phone at Daniel's house rang. It was Maggie from the shelter. She was breathless with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Emily's here. She wants to see Max again." Daniel didn't even hesitate. "Tell her to come by, anytime." Emily arrived just after noon the next day. She stepped out of her small car wearing jeans, a gray hoodie, and eyes that were already welling with emotion before she even knocked on the door. Daniel opened it slowly. They didn't speak right away. They didn't need to. Max was already standing in the hallway, ears forward, head tilted. He walked forward, no rush, no hesitation, and sat right in front of her. Emily knelt down. Her hands shook as she ran them along the fur behind his ears. "Hey boy," she whispered. "I knew someone would see you. I just didn't think it would happen like this." Max leaned into her, eyes closed, tail sweeping softly across the floor. Daniel watched the scene quietly, arms crossed, jaw clenched against the wave rising in his chest. They sat for over an hour. Emily told stories from the shelter, how she used to walk by his kennel and whisper things like, "You're worth it," and "Hold on." She told Daniel how she posted his photo that night, not because she thought it would go viral, but because she couldn't live with herself if he died in that cage. And then she said something Daniel didn't expect. "I want to start something, a project, a program. I don't have a name for it yet, but I want to help dogs like Max, the ones nobody sees, the ones that wait for years and don't get a second chance. And I want Max to be part of it." Daniel blinked. What do you mean? Therapy visits, school talks, shelter visits, a story that travels. People listen to stories like his, they remember them. She hesitated. I know it's asking a lot, but I believe he was meant for more than just being saved. He was meant to show people that it's never too late. Daniel looked at Max. The old shepherd lay calmly at Emily's feet, looking up at her with the kind of patience that only comes from someone who's seen the worst and chosen to stay soft anyway. Daniel took a breath and nodded. Let's do it. The first visit was to a middle school. Emily and Daniel stood in the auditorium as 207th graders listened to the story of a dog who waited 6 years in a shelter and then saved a life. Max lay quietly beside Daniel's chair until the Q&A. That's when a boy in the front row raised his hand and said, "How did he know where to find the girl?" Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he leaned down, rubbed Max's ear, and said, "He didn't. He just never stopped believing that someone still needed him." The room was silent. Then one student clapped. Then another. And then the whole room stood. For a dog who never gave up. Over the next months, the program grew. Max visited other schools, other shelters. He comforted veterans in recovery centers. He stood beside children in courtrooms. He sat quietly next to kids learning to read for the first time. He never barked, never demanded attention. He just showed up. And in his silence, he told the loudest truth. You are not too old. You are not too late. You are still needed. But there was one visit left. One place he hadn't returned to. The place where he had waited. And waited what? And waited. And now, he was going back. Not as a shelter dog, but as a symbol of hope. The sun was just starting to rise when Daniel pulled into the parking lot of the shelter. The same parking lot he'd first walked across, heart pounding, unsure if Shadow, now Max, would even recognize him. That day had felt like the end of a chapter. Today, it felt like the start of something bigger. Emily was already waiting by the front door. She had on her volunteer shirt, faded from years of washes, and her old name tag, Emily K. Volunteer since 2020. The moment Daniel stepped out of the truck, Max leapt down gracefully. His body moved with the confidence of a dog who knew who he was now. Not a cage number, not unadoptable, not forgotten. He was Max, and he was home, but not to stay. This time he had a mission. The shelter hadn't changed much. Same gray walls, same faint scent of bleach and fur, same row of kennels stretching down the hallway like a tunnel of second chances waiting to be seen. But the staff, they were different. When they saw Max walk through the front door, tails wagging started all down the hallway. From behind bars, from dogs still waiting, from dogs who maybe felt the shift in the air. Because Max was proof that the wait could end. Maggie stepped out from her office, a clipboard in one hand and a tissue in the other. I knew this would break me, she laughed through tears. She knelt down and Max walked straight to her. She pressed her forehead against his and whispered, You did it, boy. You made them all believe. They had prepared something special. Emily led Max and Daniel to the end of the hallway. There, where his old kennel used to be, was a glass panel display. A plaque above it read, Shadow. Now Max. He waited 6 years, and then changed lives forever. Inside the display were photos of Max over the years, behind the bars, in the news, with Abby, at the schools, with Daniel, and at the center, his original ID tag, Cage S12. Emily reached into her backpack and pulled out a brand new tag. This one read, Ambassador, Max, from Shelter Dog to Hope Giver. Daniel fastened it gently to Max's collar. Max wagged once, then sat beside the glass panel, calm and still, just like he had so many times before. Only now, the people passing by weren't strangers ignoring him. They were visitors stopping to read about him. They were children kneeling to wave. They were new adopters, asking if they could meet the dog who waited. And Max didn't flinch. He let them come. He let them touch. He let them cry. Because he understood. This place was no longer a prison. It was a beginning. And he was its proof. Later that day, Max did something no one expected. As Emily gave a small speech in front of the staff and visitors, Max stood up, left Daniel's side, and walked to one of the nearby kennels. Inside was a shy, scared-looking pit bull mix named Benny, who had been returned twice. Max sat down outside the kennel, didn't bark, didn't move, just waited. And within a few minutes, Benny crept forward and placed his paw on the gate, the same way Max had once done for Emily. The shelter coordinator wiped her eyes again. I think he just picked the next one, she whispered. By sunset, Max was back in the truck, head resting on the armrest between the seats. Daniel looked over and whispered, You ready to go? Max closed his eyes, his tail tapping once, a soft yes. That night, Emily posted a photo. Max sitting in front of his own display. The caption read, He came back to show them it's possible. Max doesn't live in a kennel anymore. He lives in hearts. The post reached over 1 million people in less than 48 hours. Donations poured in, more adoptions followed, and dogs who had been waiting for months or years finally went home. Because one dog had waited longer and made it mean something. But Max still had one final journey to make. One last chapter he had to close. The place where he was born, and where his story almost ended, before it ever began. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Daniel opened the drawer and pulled out the old manila envelope. The edges were worn, corners bent from years of being moved but never opened. Inside was a printout he had avoided for nearly a decade. The fire report. One address circled in red. 781 Franklin Hill Road. The cabin that burned. The place he once called home. The place where Max was born. The place where he was lost. And now, the place that they would return to. They drove in silence for over an hour. The road curved up into the hills, narrowing into a gravel path swallowed by overgrowth. Daniel hadn't been back since the fire. What was once his sanctuary had become a scar on the map. Max stood in the back seat, nose pressed to the cracked window, tail still, alert, as if he knew. When they reached the gate, Daniel got out and walked up the old path. Max followed, slower now, ears flicking in every direction, tail low but not tucked. The cabin was gone. In its place, a clearing. Some of the foundation stones were still visible. A blackened chimney still stood crooked, like a broken tooth in the middle of the earth. The air smelled of pine and moss and old ash. Daniel crouched and touched the ground. I thought you died here, he whispered. Max didn't respond. He just sat beside him. Then, he stood up and walked. Daniel followed as Max made his way toward the edge of the clearing. He sniffed, paused, then turned sharply toward a thicket of trees. And there, hidden by brush and vines, was something neither of them expected. The old training shed, still standing, roof partially caved, door leaning on one hinge. Inside, Daniel had once kept food bins, toys, training cones, and Max's first collar. He pulled the door open slowly. The smell of smoke and rot rushed out. But under the mess, Max walked inside. He sniffed to the far corner and stopped. There, buried under a charred plastic bin, was a worn, partially melted red ball. Daniel picked it up gently. Max wagged. Once, then nudged the ball with his nose, and lay down. It was a memory, a confirmation, a closing loop. Daniel sat beside him, placing the ball between them. You survived this, he whispered, and you became more than I ever imagined. Max rolled onto his side, pressed against Daniel's leg, and let out a deep sigh, the kind only a dog can release when a part of their soul finally exhales. The next day, Daniel and Emily filed paperwork to officially purchase the land, not to rebuild the cabin, not for a home, but for something bigger. They would call it Max's Field, a private, peaceful sanctuary where older and long-term shelter dogs could be free, even if they never found a home. Because Max had taught them, sometimes the place you were meant to be isn't behind a fence. It's in the space between where you were broken and where you chose to heal. In the weeks that followed, the story spread again. Volunteers signed up to help clear the land. Builders offered to donate fencing. Children wrote letters to Max, thanking him for saving Abby, for waiting 6 years, for showing the world that even the forgotten can become the unforgettable. And one evening, just before the first foundation stone for Max's field was laid, Daniel sat in the grass beside him. You ready to let others rest where you once broke? Max leaned his head on Daniel's lap and closed his eyes. Yes. But there was still one final chapter left to write. One final visit. Not for Max, but for someone else who never stopped loving him. The first letter arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address, just a postmark from Vermont and a shaky handwritten label, to whoever has Max. Inside was a folded sheet of paper and an old photo. Max as a puppy, no more than 6 weeks old, licking peanut butter from a little girl's cheek. Daniel sat on the porch, reading slowly. His name was Bear when I had him. My dad surprised me with him on my 10th birthday. We were best friends for 2 years. Then my parents split. We lost the house. I lost Bear. I've looked for him ever since. When I saw him on the news, I knew it was him. I don't need him back. I just needed to know he's okay. Thank you for giving him the life I couldn't. MS. Daniel blinked away tears. He looked at Max, now curled in the grass nearby, watching birds flicker through the sky. People don't just remember you, he said aloud. They carry you. More letters followed. From shelter volunteers, from former staff, from a man who said he'd nearly adopted Max 3 years earlier and had never forgiven himself for walking away. From Abby's mother, who now took Abby to a local rescue every Saturday to read books to the dogs. Each letter had one thing in common. Max had changed something. In someone. Forever. Then one day, Emily arrived at Daniel's home carrying a box. What's that? He asked. She placed it on the porch table and opened it carefully. Inside was a leather-bound book with a photo of Max on the cover. The Dog Who Waited, by Emily and Max, a self-published children's book. 30 pages, simple drawings, simple words. A powerful message. Sometimes the dog you pass by is the one who will save your life someday. Daniel flipped through the pages slowly, then closed the book and hugged her. Hard. That weekend, Max made his final public appearance. At the opening ceremony for Max's field, children ran through the grass. Old shelter dogs lay under the shade of trees. A plaque was unveiled. Max waited 6 years. Now no dog will ever wait alone again. Max sat beside the stone, still, peaceful, whole. That night, back home, Daniel sat on the floor beside him. Can I tell you something? He whispered. Max lifted his head. I thought I was rescuing you. He smiled. But you were rescuing me all along. Max passed away quietly 3 weeks later. No pain, no fear. Just a breath in, a breath out, and a life that had given more than it ever took. But his story didn't end there, because Max's field grew. Emily's book reached classrooms across the country. The shelter's adoption rate tripled. And Daniel? He still sat on the porch every morning. Not in grief, but in gratitude. Because Max had taught the world something beautiful. You are never too old, never too broken, never too forgotten to become someone's hero. If Max's story touched your heart, remember, every shelter dog is waiting for a moment like his. You can be the one who gives it to them. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Together, let's make sure no dog waits forever.